Welcome to Heart, Soul, Mind, and Strength, where we work toward loving God with everything that makes us human. Part of loving God is about loving His creation. That means living in community with other humans. But to do that effectively, we have to establish some kind of authority structure. So today, we're going to look at our government and how the Founding Fathers originally envisioned how it would work. Here we go. Recently, I was engaged in an excellent discussion with someone about what has become something of a political issue over the last few decades. It wasn't anything super controversial or anything, just abortion. If you've heard any of my previous episodes, it might not be a huge surprise to you that I would consider myself solidly in the pro-life camp on this issue. However, I do love having good, respectful discussions with people who disagree with me. Don't worry though, I'm not making a case for or against abortion today, so while I will reference this conversation, it's really only to give an example of how our government system is designed to work. So we started out by discussing whether or not the Founding Fathers would have considered abortion to be a right covered in the Constitution. After all, there's been so much contention over the years that Roe v. Wade should not have been overturned, and that by doing so, we somehow removed a constitutional right to an abortion. It didn't take much time to get to a point of agreement about the fact that abortion is not, in fact, a constitutional right, and it was never thought of that way by any of the people who wrote it. We agreed that John Adams, George Washington, James Madison, and even Thomas Jefferson would have been astonished that something like this could ever even be considered by civilized people. The conversation moved forward, and I had argued that legislating this issue at the level of the federal government, regardless of which side you're on, would be a terrible idea. My argument was based on the idea that the population of one state might have largely different feelings about this than the population of another state. So, whichever way the federal government decided to implement a law regarding abortion, a very large portion of the people would be exceedingly unhappy about it. It was my position at the time that only policies that have extraordinarily high degrees of approval across various demographics and a majority of the states should ever be legislated at the federal level. To do anything else would alienate the other half of the population by forcing them to comply with ideals that were shoehorned into law by the other half of the population. Now, on further reflection, it seemed like there might be some flaws with this theory. The writings of the Founding Fathers seem to further support that there were some problems with my thinking. Even when looking at the first attempt at a general government, in the form of the Articles of Confederation, not to mention the explicitly enumerated powers given to the federal government in the Constitution, I couldn't get away from the fact that I needed to rethink things. For example, the overwhelming majority of people in every state in this country would probably agree that there should be laws against murder, the unjustified killing of another human being. However, based on the logic I had been using, with that sort of ubiquitous support, shouldn't laws against murder be handled in Washington, D.C.? Yet they're handled by each state individually. I know that there are some federal laws regarding murder, but those only apply under specific circumstances. So when considering the Constitution itself, and the various letters written to and from the men who were largely responsible for how the Constitution turned out, it started to become clear to me that the purpose for the federal government, what they referred to as the general government, was to handle things that the individual states didn't have sufficient capacity to legislate and enforce on their own. For example, it wouldn't be feasible for each individual state to send delegates to negotiate with foreign countries regarding things like treaties or trade agreements, so the federal government represents the states in that situation. Interstate commerce and a unified currency were also things that would be best left to a centralized government. Otherwise, there would likely have been wars fought between the states over these kinds of things. The states, however, are perfectly capable of legislating and enforcing laws prohibiting murder and theft and assault and all that sort of thing. So, these crimes are handled by the states individually. There's no need for the centralized government to step in and handle them. So the states maintain their sovereignty regarding these laws in criminal justice in general. Coming back to the original conversation about abortion, as I already said, any decision or law passed in Washington, D.C. would make a significant portion of the population unhappy, and they would feel like their values and ideals were being violated. Whereas by legislating this on a state-by-state basis, people can congregate and live among the states whose populations largely agree with them on this issue. and avoid living in states where the population largely disagrees with them. I mean, who wants to live their lives surrounded by people they disagree with anyway? That's so exhausting. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to move from one state to another if you're in that situation, but at least it's an option. Whereas with a federal law, that would eliminate that option. Now, as I come to a close with this, I do want to point out a couple of things that I think are very important. First, this idea of legislating at the correct governmental level is relevant for more than just abortion laws. That was just the issue I chose to illustrate my point. This should be taken into consideration with every law that's submitted or considered. The question should be asked, is this the most appropriate level of government for this to be legislated? Next, keep in mind that there are more levels of government than just federal and state. Some things might be better legislated at the county or the municipal level, given that a lot of states, while they largely tend to lean one way or the other politically, they tend to also have pockets of communities that lean the opposite way. So those people's ideals shouldn't just be pounced just because there are fewer of them in the state overall. The general rule of thumb should be, the more directly something impacts people's everyday lives, the closer to home it should be legislated. Finally, not everything that we think is wrong should be legislated and made to be illegal. Sometimes we need to rely on simply persuading people to our point of view so that they won't choose to do things that we wish they wouldn't, or vice versa. For a long time throughout human history, people simply didn't do the things they thought were immoral, regardless of whether or not it was legal. We can still do that today. Just thought you might like to know. In fact, I think it would be best at every level of government to generally avoid legislating issues before successfully persuading a significant majority to be in agreement on it. If not, it becomes one side beating the other side over the head using lawfare. Convince people that your side is right, and they'll be happy to legislate the things most people agree on. So let's be thoughtful about how we legislate, at what level, and who's impacted by it. And also, let's keep an open mind that we can and should have conversations with each other and work toward respectfully persuading people to our point of view rather than coming down with the hammer of the law every time someone does something that we think they shouldn't do. So with that, have a calm, rational, fruitful, and polite discussion with somebody you disagree with. Until we come back to the next episode. So, what did you think? I hope this was helpful and thought-provoking for you. Please feel free to leave me any feedback you may have, but please do so respectfully, and I'll be respectful in return. As I mentioned before, this project is just getting started, so I need your help to get this in front of more people. If you could share feedback or link back to here, it'll help get the word out. And the best thing to do is share it with everyone you know. Plus, stop by the website and subscribe. That way you're always the first to get any new comment. You can subscribe on the website by email. You can subscribe on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you come back regularly because I'm always going to be adding new resources and you don't want to miss any of that. You'll find a link to the website here in the notes. Thanks again, and I look forward to sharing the next exciting topic with you.